نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. وقال أيضا وإن طائفتان من المؤمنين اقتتلوا فأصلحوا بينهما فإن بغت إحداهما على الأخرى فقاتلوا التي تبغي حتى تفيء إلى أمر الله فإن فاءت فأصلحوا بينهما بالعدل وأقسطوا إن الله يحب المقسطين. إنما المؤمنون إخوة فأصلحوا بين أخويكم واتقوا الله لعلكم ترحمون. أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters, previously we've been discussing about akhlaq. We've been discussing about manners, morals, and our character, our attitude. And in specific, we were going over the tafsir of Surah Al-Hujurat. In Surah Al-Hujurat we covered a number of ayat, and just to give you a summary of the main points that we've covered so far in the past 2-3 weeks is firstly that adab, akhlaq, manners, morals, this is from our deen. This is a very, very fundamental aspect of our deen. Secondly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us in this surah that when we speak to one another, when we communicate with one another, we have to communicate, we have to talk to one another in a respectful manner. We have to speak in an appropriate manner. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us that. And the second main important thing that we've covered is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us when we receive some sort of information, we should try our best to first and foremost understand it before responding. So if someone gives us some sort of information, we have to first verify whether that information is correct. And secondly, we have to verify whether or not we have understood that information correctly. Because many times, we argue over things, and then what happens is that we're arguing, but we're arguing because of miscommunication. So these are some of the things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has covered in Surah Al-Hujurat, and these are some of the things that we should try our best to really inculcate and develop within our lives. Now before we move on to the next ayat, there's something very important that needs to be mentioned. And that is that throughout the Quran, right from the beginning of the Quran all the way till the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us one thing. And that one thing is that our deen is all about amal. It's all about practice. It's all about taking action. If a person reads the entire Quran, memorizes the entire Quran, learns every single thing he needs to about the entire Quran, but there's no practice of that Quran, he does not take action, then everything he has learned is really useless. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us that right from the beginning of the Quran. And one of the most profound surahs in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains that to us is Surah Al-Asr. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ, that all of humanity is in loss except for the people who believe and act on the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the Quran. So this is very important, that our deen is a deen of action. We're hearing so many things on a weekly basis. We're learning about how to develop ourselves as good people, how to develop our manners, our morals, how to develop our character, our attitude. But the only way we can develop, the only way we can move forward is when we take action. And naturally as human beings, what we do is we're blind to our own faults, and we're very receptive, we're very open to the faults of others. When we hear about things like what we've been covering, about jumping to conclusions, about being in a rush, not being patient, about speaking in a way which is in a rude manner, instead of thinking of ourselves, and this, everyone, this is a problem with all of us, this is human nature. Instead of thinking about ourselves, we think about someone else. Why? Because it's easier to think about someone else than think about ourselves. It's easier to be critical about someone else than be critical about oneself. Because when we try to be critical about oneself, then we have to face reality. And it becomes very difficult sometimes. You know, when someone says something very critical of us, that, you know, it hurts, even if it may be true. If your teacher or your boss or your spouse, they come and, you know, they criticize you, constructive criticism, they criticize you because they like you or because they care about you. Even then it's very painful to listen to. Why? Because now there's something wrong with us. And that's why it's easier to criticize others than criticize our own selves. But the point is that, you know, we're learning so many things. And as we're learning these things, we should be very, very critical about ourselves. And we should focus on ourselves more than we focus on other people. Right? It's very easy. We can focus on other people for 30, 40, 50 minutes. We can find every single mistake the other person has. But when it comes to us, we think about ourselves for 30 seconds and we're like, yeah, we're perfect. We have no mistakes. It should be the exact opposite. And understand that when it comes to criticizing our own self, it takes time, it takes practice. Because our minds are designed in a way, you know, naturally we're people that when we do something, we always cover up the real intent. You know, if we're doing something bad, then our mind tells us that don't worry, you know, you're doing it for a good reason. You know, all of us have experienced this. We're doing something for the wrong reason, but we try to justify it. You know, and we try to convince ourselves that we're doing it for the right thing. But in reality, deep down, you know, we know we're doing it for the wrong thing. So it takes practice. You know, it takes practice. It takes a lot of effort. That you really have to question yourself. You really have to be honest with yourself. And you really have to, you know, question every single one of your actions, every single one of your intentions. And the easiest way is really when you do something and you feel guilty about it, or you feel that you have to justify your action, that's when you have to understand that there's something wrong with that action. If you have to justify your action, if you have to tell yourself, oh, you know, the real reason I'm doing this is because of that, not that. That's when you understand that there's a problem with what you're doing. And then you have to really, you know, rectify the situation, rectify your intention. But this is very difficult, and, you know, this is something which we have our entire lives to work on. And this is the main point, that our deen is a deen of action, but it's not something which will happen overnight. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that we are people that we can't change overnight. But, you know, there's only one or two incidents of people that, you know, drastically change overnight. But for the majority of us, 99% of us, we take baby steps, we take gradual steps. We slowly change, one habit at a time, one action at a time. And we have our entire lives. And, you know, one of the most beautiful hadith of Rasulullah ﷺ is إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالْخَوَاتِمِ, that your actions are based on the end. Meaning your entire life, you could have been, you know, a very bad person. But you're slowly working, and towards the end of your life, you become someone good. And you pass away in that condition, and that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at your end result. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالْخَوَاتِمِ, your actions are based on the end result. And, you know, along with this hadith, something comes to mind that just recently, not over here in America, somewhere in England, a young lady accepted Islam. She became Muslim. And in 10 hours after becoming Muslim, she passed away. You know, so, and she had so many people coming to her janazah, because she was initially 10 hours ago she was a non-Muslim. There was no one to, you know, pray for her janazah, pray in her janazah. So the entire community came to pray. But that's something beautiful, you know, what Rasulullah ﷺ was saying, that your entire life, you know, you were someone who didn't believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In your entire life you were someone who did not believe in Rasulullah ﷺ. You didn't pray, you didn't fast, you didn't give zakah, nothing. She became a Muslim, 10 hours later she passed away. And subhanAllah, you know, there were thousands of people in her janazah. And same thing, during the time of Rasulullah ﷺ, there was a Sahaba who became a Muslim, and he didn't get a chance to pray even one salah, and he passed away. and the Sahaba would refer to him as the person who passed away without ever praying salah, without ever fasting, without ever doing any good deed. And this is what it's all about. We have our entire lives to work on it. But unless we're going to be people who don't want to work, then we're losing out. Again, Surah Al-Asr really makes it clear to us that if you're a person that is not willing to take action, then you will be in loss. Unless we begin to take action, once we commit ourselves to taking action, even if that action is just one step, understand that that is better than not taking action at all and just being lazy about it. And again, it's about the end result. It's about the effort you put into it. For one person, giving up a small habit may be very, very difficult. And that difficulty is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at, that effort. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward that person accordingly. But nevertheless, moving on, last week we spoke about, speaking correctly and learning to understand. In today's khutbah, before we move on to the next ayat, I'd like to just give examples of how the Prophet ﷺ spoke. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that, speak in a respectful manner, speak in a respectful tone, understand before you jump to conclusions, understand before you respond, understand before you say anything. Over here, I'd like to give examples of how Rasulullah ﷺ spoke, how Rasulullah ﷺ reacted when something, bad happened. So the first hadith is a person goes to Aisha radiallahu anha, and he asks Aisha radiallahu anha that tell me about the character of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What kind of person was he? What kind of character did he have? What kind of attitude did he have? So then Aisha radiallahu anha says to this person that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was lam yakun fahishan wala mutafahishan. That Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a person who lam yakun fahishan. He was a person who was not immoral. He was not a person who would say bad things. He was not a person who would say inappropriate things. He was not a person who would use vulgar, would use dirty language, would use dirty examples. It wasn't his nature. Some people, for some of us, it's a habit that after every single word or every single sentence, we have to add in a bad word, just to give it emphasis, or just to make it sound good. Or we give when we're explaining things, we give like dirty examples, so in an immoral manner, in a moral which is unprofessional, in a manner which is vulgar, profane. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not like that. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not a person who used profanity. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not a person who used vulgar language. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not a person who spoke in an indecent manner. And then she says, وَلَا مُتَفَحِّشًا. And he was not mutafahish. There's a difference between fahish and mutafahishan. Fahish is a person who is naturally, it's become their habit that they speak, indecent. It's become their habit that they speak in a bad way. They use vulgar. Every single word, every other word, it's like a bad word for them, right? And then mutafahish is a person who forces themselves to use, vulgar, to use profanity. So you have some friends or some people that no matter what the situation is, they'll say something bad. They'll use like a dirty word. They'll use some sort of vulgar. They'll bring something up which is dirty. So that's the difference. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was naturally a person who was not in the habit of using bad language, and he was not the type that made himself, or forced himself to use that sort of language. And then she says, وَلَا سَخَّابًا فِي الْأَسْوَاقِ. He was not a person who would scream. He wasn't a person that goes to the markets and raises his voice and screams and shouts at people. So this is important. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not the type of person that would scream at one another. Some people naturally have loud voices. When I was studying in South Africa, we had people from a certain country, and when they would get together to sit down and eat, you would think they're screaming and arguing with one another. But when you go to them and they're having fun, that's how they talk. But generally speaking, if you're a person, if you're from a society where, screaming, talking in loud voices is considered, rude, then that's something you should really take into consideration. That Rasulullah ﷺ was not a person, وَلَا سَخَّابًا فِي الْأَسْوَاقِ. He was not a person who would scream and shout. Right? Rasulullah ﷺ did not like that kind of behavior. In fact, once when the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, Rasulullah ﷺ and the Sahaba, they were marching, they were going somewhere, the Sahaba began, they were very excited. They were very excited and they began to say, Allahu Akbar, very loudly. They began shouting, very loudly, La ilaha illallah, and they were raising their voices. And then Rasulullah ﷺ got a little, frustrated. He said, why are you guys screaming? La tad'una lasam. You guys are not, calling to someone who's deaf. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not deaf. You don't have to scream. You don't have to shout. So Rasulullah ﷺ was a type that didn't like loud voices. Screaming and shouting. Loud voices is different. If a person has a loud voice, that's different. People that are constantly screaming, shouting, whenever something happens, they lose their temper, they start yelling and arguing. That's something that's very important. And that's the worst way to communicate. Sometimes husband and wife, they get into arguments, and instead of speaking to one another properly, the husband or the wife, they start yelling at one another. And that's very, very detrimental. Why? Because your children see that. When husband and wife are yelling at each other, shouting at one another, the children, they are witnessing all that, and that's what they're going to learn. When they get angry, that's the way they're going to respond to you. That's what they're learning from you. When they get angry at their friends, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to shout. And when you shout, when you scream, when you get angry, you do things that you end up regretting. You end up, getting physical, violent, you say things. So this is very crucial. That if we're in the habit of screaming and shouting when we lose our temper, we have to work on it. And again, our deen is about taking action. We have to ask ourselves that when's the last time we got angry and how did we behave? When's the last time we got angry and how did we behave? How did we respond? What did we do? Was our response correct or was it incorrect? And really, document all this, write it all down, so that next time you can record it and make the rectification. That's the only way you'll change. And that's what psychologists do. If a person has some sort of behavior that they want to get rid of, they go to a psychologist and then they make them record all their actions. If people who have eating disorders, right? People that have eating disorders, they go to psychologists and then they'll tell them write down everything and make note of it, and that helps them change themselves. And that's really what, if you have a really, really bad habit, such as screaming and shouting when you get angry, really do that, write it down, so that next time when you get angry, you have a plan that I'm angry now, what am I going to do? I'm going to walk away from the situation, or I'm going to do something else, but I'm not going to scream, I'm not going to shout, I'm not going to jump to conclusions. And then she says, وَلَا يُجْزِئُ بِالسَّيِّئَةِ, that Rasulullah ﷺ would never, react in a harsh manner. If someone treated him badly, if someone treated him in an evil manner, he would not treat them in an evil manner. Rather, he would forgive them. Right? وَلَكِنْ يَعْفُ وَيَصْفَحُ. He would forgive them. If a person, said something evil to Rasulullah ﷺ, in fact, there was once during when Rasulullah ﷺ was in Mecca, some people were saying really bad things to Rasulullah ﷺ, and he just stayed quiet. Abu Bakr, who was next to him, lost his temper, and Abu Bakr, he told this person, "Umsus badarullat." Right? If you know what that means, then it's something not too good. Right? Umsus badarullat, that it's something bad. So then Rasulullah ﷺ is, calmed Abu Bakr down. He says, don't say things like that. It's not good. But that was the type of Rasulullah ﷺ. He would receive abuse, but he would stay quiet and he would forgive them. That was his character. Moving on, Anas radiallahu anhu, he says that Rasulullah ﷺ, لم يكن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم سبابا ولا فحاشا ولا لعانا. Rasulullah ﷺ was not a person who would curse people. He was not a person who would, use bad names for other people. sometimes we get angry at people and we call them names that, oh, you're fat, or, you're ugly, or whatever, right? Rasulullah ﷺ was not that type of person who would use, these bad names for people. وَلَا فَحَّاشًا, and he was not a person who used dirty language. كَانَ يَقُولُ لِأَحَدِنَا عِنْدَ الْمَعْتَبَ مَا لَهُ تَرَبَتْ جَبَنَيْهِ. Right? He was a type of person that whenever something, if he ever had to rebuke anyone, if ever he had to tell someone that you're doing something bad, he would never go to that person directly and criticize that person in a way that would hurt their feelings. Right? That's how beautiful the Prophet ﷺ was. He would never say anything that would hurt a person's feelings. He would tell them that, here's the problem, you need to fix this, but he would say it in such a way that the person would not feel offended. And this is what we have to do. If we see that our children are doing something bad, we see that our spouses have a bad habit, then it's not that we stay quiet or we become blind. It's that we take the right way of assessing these situations. If we see our children doing something we don't like, we have to speak to them in a way that it's not disparaging. We don't belittle them. We don't tell them, what are you? You're stupid. You're dumb. How can you not do this properly? Speak to them in a proper manner. Tell them that this is wrong and this is the right action. You have to learn to do that. We all have to learn to speak like that. And again, it takes time. Sometimes the response may not be good, but we just have to keep on trying. And that's how Rasulullah ﷺ was. That he would never criticize anyone in a way that would hurt their feelings. He was not a person that would criticize someone in a way that would make them feel bad, in a way that would make them feel low, that would make them feel disparaged. He would tell them that this is the problem, and he would tell them in a way that they did not feel guilty about it in that sense. And then again, Rasulullah, the Sahaba, he says that Rasulullah sallallahu كان لا يواجه أحدا في وجهه بشيء يكرهه. He would never say anything to anyone which they would dislike. So these are the things that we really have to adopt, and these are the things that we really have to take into consideration. That this is how the Prophet ﷺ behaved, and this is what we have to slowly inculcate within ourselves. And again, it may sound very simple that Rasulullah ﷺ was very forgiving. He never criticized anyone in a way that hurt their feelings. It sounds very simple. It sounds very beautiful. But try it out. Let someone come at you and scream at you or say something, and then we lose our temper. It's very difficult to actually practice on this. But again, if you practice, if you make slow steps, if you take slow steps, one day, you'll get over these bad habits. The first day you may lose your temper, but the next day you may lose your temper, but you'll be aware. When you lose your temper, you say things that you end up regretting. So the first step may be that, okay, I get angry, but this time I'm going to try to control what I say. The next time I get angry, and this time I learn to control my speech, but at the same time I'm also going to step away from the situation. So you take small steps, small steps into rectifying the entire situation. These things don't happen overnight, and it really takes a lot of effort from our sides. And again, if you're going to be the person who says, I'm completely free of all these shortcomings, I have no problem, then there's no way out. If a person thinks there's no problem, then there's nothing to fix. It's like a person who's on a boat, and the boat is like, there's a hole in it, and you tell the person, look, there's a hole in the boat, and he's saying, no, there's no boat. He's never going to fix it. So, we have to be people that really look into ourselves and rectify our situation. Moving on to the next ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِن طَائِفَتَانِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ اقْتَتَلُوا فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا فَإِن بَغَتْ إِحْدَاهُمَا عَلَى الْأُخْرَى فَقَاتِلُوا الَّتِي تَبْغِي حَتَّى تَفِيءَ إِلَى أَمْرِ اللَّهِ فَإِن فَاءَتْ فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا بِالْعَدْلِ وَأَقْسِطُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُقْسِطِينَ. Now in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is informing us that if two groups of Muslims, they get into argument, right? If they start arguing with one another, they fight with one another, what do you do? Now before we actually speak about this ayah, there's something that needs to be understood. There's one concept, or there's one thing where we disagree with one another, we argue with one another, that's fine. And then there's a second one where that disagreement and that argument leads to hatred. That is not fine. You can disagree with one another. During the time of Rasulullah ﷺ, the Sahaba disagreed with one another. Sometimes the Sahaba disagreed with what Rasulullah ﷺ said. That's fine, no problem. You can disagree. But if your disagreement, if you arguing with someone leads to hatred, that is when it becomes a problem. You know, the Sahaba, they disagreed with one another, but their disagreements did not lead them to hating one another. So many people, people that are married, they disagree with their spouses. But do they hate their spouses? They don't. We disagree with our children, but does that mean we hate our children? No. That's the same sort of, relationship we should have with the rest of our Muslim brothers and sisters. That we can disagree on certain things, but that disagreement should not lead us to hating them. It should not lead us to trying to, make them look bad in front of people. So this is very important. Some people think that, we shouldn't. Some people think that, in order to be unified, or in order to be a community, we have to agree on everything. We have to do everything the same way. Everything has to look uniform. No, it's not. That's not true. We can have differences. We can do different things. We can practice Islam different ways. No problem. But if those disagreements lead us to hating one another, that's when it becomes an issue, right? And one of the best examples is during the Battle of Uhud. During the Battle of Uhud, Rasulullah ﷺ told a group of people, a group of warriors, 50 warriors, and these warriors were very good archers. He told them that no matter what happens, you guys will stay, you guys will remain in your spot, right? Whether we win the battle, whether we lose the battle, or whatever happens, you stay on your spot. And what happened during the Battle of Uhud was that, the enemies that were fighting with Rasulullah ﷺ and the Sahaba, they were moving back, they were running away. And then these Sahaba, the 50 archers, they saw that, hey look, we're winning the battle, we're going to go. And then the leader of that 50 group of people, he said, you can't go. Rasulullah ﷺ said, don't go. And they began arguing with one another. So that's the type of argumentation, that's the sort of disagreement that should be avoided. When we disagree and it creates hatred for one another and it creates chaos, right? That's what needs to be avoided. But to simply disagree and simply have our own opinions, take different paths and whatnot, that's completely fine. That needs to be understood and made clear. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over here is saying that if two groups of Muslims, they get into argument, then فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا, then it becomes our responsibility to fix that situation. And again over here, something very, very important. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He's saying that fix that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not speaking to everyone. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking to the people of authority. Right? What that means is, if you see, two people in the masjid, they're arguing with one another. You've never met them, you've never seen them, they don't know you. You don't go up to them and you start telling them, oh, listen to my advice, this is my advice for you. That's not how things work. If you give advice, you have to first understand that when I'm giving advice, am I giving advice to the people that know me, that will listen to me? So this ayah is speaking to the people of authority. It's speaking to people like parents. When you see your children doing something, then it's your responsibility to go and speak to them, right? It's not someone else's responsibility, right? So that has to be understood. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِن بَغَتْ إِحْدَاهُمَا عَلَى الْأُخْرَى فَقَاتِلُوا الَّتِي تَبْغِي حَتَّى تَفِيءَ إِلَىٰ أَمْرِ اللَّهِ, that if it so happens that one party decides to disobey and go against the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we should pursue and we should try our best to rectify the situation. But the main point in this ayah that I'd like to mention and bring to everyone's attention is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying fix the situation, but there's a condition of fixing the situation. And that condition is that you fix the situation in a just manner. It doesn't mean you go in there, you're biased, you favor one party and the other party, you neglect them, and the situation is resolved. When you resolve the issue, you have to resolve it with equality and justice. You have to be fair. This is the condition. If you know that you cannot be fair, then don't handle it. Sometimes people have marriage problems and they go to their parents. And that's very bad. You know why? Because our parents, they're sincere, they love us, but that's the problem. They love us, and because of their love, they're biased. They'll take, their child's side, even if their child is wrong. So sometimes that's not the best decision. If you know that if someone comes to you and says, can you help me fix my problem? If you know that you cannot be fair, you cannot fix the problem in a just manner, in a fair manner, then don't do it. Direct them to someone that can. And this is the main point that I want everyone to keep in mind tonight. Today. That when it comes to resolving issues, when it comes to fixing disagreements and arguments, you have to do it in a just manner. You can't be biased. You can't say, I'm going to favor this one party and the other party because I don't like them, I'm going to, make them look bad or not give them their fair share, right? If we can't do it, then don't take that responsibility. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is advising. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to practice on this. Ameen. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Qur'an al-Majid wa nafa'ana wa iyyakum bil ayati wa dhikril hakim. Astaghfirullah li wa lakum wa li sa'iril muslimin fastaghfiru innahu huwal ghafurur rahim. الحمد لله الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله شهيدا ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وصل على المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات وبارك على محمد وأزواجه وذريته قال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام أرحم أمتي بأمتي أبو بكر وأشدهم في أمر الله تعالى عمر وأصدقهم حياء عثمان وأقضاهم علي وفاطمة سيدة نساء أهل الجنة والحسن والحسين سيدة شباب أهل الجنة والحمزة أسد الله أسد رسوله رضوان الله تعالى عليهم أجمعين. Dear brothers and sisters, before we finish off, just to recap what we've covered today, is we went over the character of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in specific, we went over how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam communicated, how he spoke. We mentioned that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not the type of person who used dirty language. He was not the type of person who used foul language, no profanity, no vulgar. He did not call people by names they did not like. And then we went over how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would advise people. If Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw that someone had a problem, if someone had some sort of issue, he would tell them in a way that did not make them feel bad. It gave them a sense of urgency. It gave them a sense that, yes, I have a problem, I have to fix it. But it did not make them feel bad. Let me give you an example. If you see that, one of your friends has, a habit of, smoking. There's two ways you can do it. You can go to that person, you can go to your friend and tell him, what are you, stupid? Are you dumb? You smoke, and really make that person feel bad. The other way is you go to that person and you tell him, listen, you're my friend, I really care about you, I care about your health, and I want the best for you. And I want to help you and I want to support you in living a better life. There's a huge difference. You're trying to do the same thing, but you're approaching the situation in very, very different manners. And that's what Rasulullah ﷺ taught us. That when you see something bad in people, right, then advise them in a way that does not make them feel bad, does not hurt their feelings. And lastly, the last thing we covered was that when we are given the responsibility of, fixing a problem between two people, we have to ask ourselves that in handling the situation, can we be fair? Right? If we have a liking towards one group or one person, and we know that it's going to be difficult for us to be fair and treat them justly, then don't take that responsibility. Give it to someone else. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages us to, help two people rectify their situations, and there's a lot of reward to it. But at the same time, if we know that we cannot be fair, that we're going to be on our friend's side or our family side, then don't take it. Direct them to someone else or ask someone else to handle the situation. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to make these small differences in our lives. And these small differences, if we make them, they will change the quality of our life. They will change the way we deal with people and the way we have our relations with people. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to practice on these sunnahs. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us to develop these qualities in our hearts, in our lives. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to truly follow in the footsteps of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ameen. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون فاذكروا الله يذكركم واشكروه ولا تكفرون أقيموا الصلاة